Hello and welcome to The Person of the Therapist. I'm Dee Preston-Dillon, and in this series, we really are exploring what brings a therapist to this field of mental health, no matter what their particular discipline. Maybe there was something developmentally for them, or in graduate school, or in midlife career change. So we'll be exploring these questions, and today I'm welcoming my guest, Mina Barimany, who is hailing in from, I think, Salt Lake City, Utah. Is that right, Mina?
Yes, way out
Oh,
here in the Mountain West.
welcome. And I would like to begin with you setting the stage with your specialization, your profession, your if there's a theoretical leaning that you embrace or maybe what you integrate. And so let's start with right there with laying that foundation, and then we'll explore some of our other threads.
Okay. Um, I have, I'm sure we'll get into this. I have a pretty diverse training background. So, as most people you've probably interviewed, I practice an integrative form of therapy. But I think my two areas of specialization are truly the training and supervision piece and the individual mental health treatment. And I do work with couples every now and again because my background is in MFT. But those are kind of my two big pieces. As far as the issues that I treat, I've sort of become a professional generalist, and I'm sure we'll get to that later. I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about it. But those are my two passions.
When are you working primarily with adults, or do you see the whole developmental spectrum?
In the last 7 years, just with adults, so over at the age of 18. But earlier parts of my career, I was working with little ones and kids and families.
Uh-huh.
Well,
And so you're a marriage and family therapist. Would you say that was your specialty? Or are you counseling, marriage and family therapy? Are there different degrees that you're merging here?
somewhat. I think theoretically more than anything else. I practice under my LPC, but the
Mhm.
systemic theory really influences how I think about individual work and couples and training, frankly. So.
Yeah. Well, what particular school, in terms of integrating in a systemic way, what particular schools of thought do you really dig into? Do you embrace?
I think the narrative therapy really resonates for me, kind of in the more postmodern
Uh-huh.
paradigm. I think, if I'm being honest, if you're looking at me through a window doing therapy, I'm doing a lot of psychodynamic
Mhm.
work,
Mhm.
a lot of interpersonal process. And then
Mhm.
there's a big dose of it that's around consciousness development in adulthood. I
Mhm.
think that's kind of coming out of my own personal work as an adult. But I feel
Mhm.
like consciousness development plays a big role in mental health and development in adulthood too. So that kind of gets integrated as well.
So, Mina, when you talk about consciousness, help us understand what your platform is. What would that include? How would you amplify that?
Yeah, I think probably the most concise way to describe it would be this idea of meta awareness. So, the ability to be in the self, to be outside the self, and to kind of be meta aware of both at the same time, or the both and kind of thing.
Hmm. Hmm. That helps. That really helps. And so I'm imagining there's just so many really creative psychotherapies that can work with one becoming more aware of these internal voices and mindsets, and then to become more conscious, more aware of
Mhm.
those that meta level that you refer to. Uh, what creative or expressive therapies, psychodynamic orientations, maybe systems theory, maybe what actual techniques have you used?
As far as just like
Like
techniques in clinical work.
Gestalt. Mhm.
Oh, that's a tough one. I tend to be a little loose with like picking and choosing, or at least naming theories. I kind of shoot from the hip a little bit in my work with clients.
Right?
Um,
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of like a sort of a technical term for how you might. Um,
Would you lean toward more of a drama therapist, acting out family systems, or more lean toward more dream interpretation, hypnosis, or wherever that. And I'm imagining there's just an array that you might adapt it for
Yeah.
your clients.
I think the narrative approach probably best describes the systemic work because
Mm-hmm.
that I think also ties into the consciousness piece and the being construct aware and being able to kind of watch how these sort of mental containers are influencing how we show up and kind of clues around how we might be able to do things differently and interrupt certain patterns. So I think the narrative approach
Mm-hmm.
probably, yeah, when it comes to the family work, I think that probably influences me the most. And
Mm-hmm.
then probably structural family therapy when you're actually working with clients in the room,
Mm-hmm.
taking that approach.
Now, my understanding is you're a therapist and a supervisor, clinical supervisor, and you do training. So when you're carrying over a very systemic social constructionist narrative approach to all three domains in terms of the lens that you conceptualize in supervision, would you like to offer an example? And I want to come back to the client world, but in the moment, what do you do in your supervision that allows you to use this multidimensional approach?
Hmm. Try to think if there's a way to kind of break it down in a way that makes sense. Oftentimes I feel like in supervision, it's kind of like I've got this whole pantry of tools and techniques. And then actually, I was just talking to Sarah about this the other day. There's the what and then there's the how. And then she talked about this idea of reparenting, and we talked about all the different things that a parent does. Like they have to be a coach, they have to be a friend, they have to be a disciplinarian, they have to be a mentor, an example.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like in supervision, it's very similar. So
Hmm.
like when the moment is presenting, like sometimes we need to kind of move into coaching around some really practical strategies and maybe motivating. Sometimes we need to work on the narrative piece and really unpacking a narrative and a sort of the
Hmm.
perspective that something is coming from. Sometimes we talk about like the power dynamic that the client is struggling with in a family. So I guess I'm saying it's always a little bit of everything.
Yeah. And so that really brings you to, I think, emphasizing the importance of immediacy, like
Yeah,
being heightened presence,
mhm,
very attunement
totally.
to the client or the supervisee or the group that you're working with.
Yeah.
That really all of the other um, wheels, all the different features of really facilitating the work that you do, it seems that your immediacy in what will be a best fit is very important to you.
100%. And I think that that dovetails really nicely into the person of the therapist stuff. Because if the main sort of artery of what's happening is mediated by this sort of like instinctual response
Mhm.
in me,
Mhm.
one of the things that you have to get really good at over the years is figuring out, well, what's yours and what's theirs and what's ours to work on and really sorting through all those
Yeah.
pieces. And even when you make a mistake, being able to reflect on there's nothing really there's no mistake in therapy. It's just what happens.
Yeah,
So
beautifully,
yeah,
beautifully. So that immediacy not only tunes you into what is needed and appropriate in the moment with the client or supervisee, but also for yourself. I hear in the weave, in the our use of metaphor, the artery, the weave, that you're attending, you're very present to who you are in that moment, what you're experiencing, and then pulling that thread out,
Mhm.
but yet not so far apart that you're not still attuned, resonating, and kinesthetically very aware, working alongside of collaboratively with your clients.
Yeah, totally. It's almost as if there's like four dimensions happening in the room. There's me being in me being in my client, me
Yeah.
being in the corner of the room watching, and then kind of this more integrated
Yes.
um, wisdom,
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah, I love that picture. You know, I'm wondering what expressive therapies have you found most useful in terms of any of the array, the play therapies, the art therapies, the drama therapies, music, poetry? Um, how do you bring your intuitive, imaginary, creative self to this work?
That's a great question. I think there's a lot of room for improvement in my own skill set with that. But I think in the ways that it has come out is in this sort of like visualization um, component that I think happens very intuitively for me. So, for example, like anger is something that I talk about. Your relationship to anger is something that I talk about a lot with clients, especially as it relates to boundary setting, because that's something that so many people struggle with. And so as I was kind of like working through my own relationship with anger, I kind of just naturally found myself creating these almost like dioramas in my head that were completely imaginary, but just outlets for what my anger wanted to do. And the one that I bring up the most often is this, like if you pick up all your anger and you let yourself be flooded with it, like what does it want to do? And for me, it turns into a lion, and the lion roars so hard that it turns inside out. That's just the visual imagery that's
Mhm.
always come to me viscerally when I think about how to work with my anger. And so using that as sort of an example. So yeah, that's sort of a
Mhm.
technique, like let's suspend reality for a second and get creative. Talk to me about what your anger wants to do. Create
Well,
a visual for me.
yes. So externalizing the emotion, projecting it into this amazing image that you just described for yourself, but then facilitating in a safe way for clients to externalize whatever emotion or memory or experience is layered there into their imaginations. And that then is so readily available to work
Mhm.
with.
Yeah,
Yeah. Wow. Very
absolutely.
powerful. Love that image. Um, what brought you, would you say there was a developmental moment when you were growing up that you knew about the mental health field, or was there something that brought you through adolescence or adulthood? Was there a career change? How did you end up in this field?
This is such a great question because I wanted to write a book about what brings people into doing this work. It's so fascinating. So I'll start with a funny story that probably will just give you a sense of like my broad answer to this question.
Okay.
I have a memory from when I was like probably 4 or 5 years old, and my mom and dad were arguing. And I think at some point, I grabbed them and I dragged them to the family room and I made them sit down. And I told my dad that he needed to apologize to my mom. And then when he did that, I told my mom, now you apologize to dad. And then I had my mom put on lipstick and give my dad a kiss.
Oh,
So it's like, yeah, I mean, if anyone was like born to do this work, I don't know what else could be an indication of that.
that is such a beautiful, powerful story. It's so, I think all of us can see that little 4-year-old pulling her mom and dad into the family room and then taking charge. Wow. And then the delight of putting the lipstick on. You bring such color and magic and vividness and
Mhm,
sensuality
mhm.
to that moment. And was this something that they commented on like throughout your growing years? Was it just a memory that got tucked away? Were there other things, for example? Did your friends find themselves coming to you, or was there, how did you keep pulling that thread forward to who you are today?
Totally. I don't remember if my mom reminded me of this memory or if it was just tucked away. I have a very, very vivid memory of it. I don't think my dad remembers, but he has a bad memory like I do. But I guess sort of like to answer your question, yeah, I was always either pulled into or put myself in the role of the mediator. And I think that that has a lot to do with my nervous system and sort of somewhat identifying as a highly sensitive person because it does feel like conflict feels physical to me. And so I think I was always trying to create safety around me, whether it was my business or not. It's still something I'm learning as an adult. Um, but the other big piece was that I was a competitive figure skater for 10 years. And so, and I was sort of like the kind of athlete that was just a wreck when it came down to the important moments. I was great in practice and I would just crumble under the pressure. And so I was just dealing with working out my relationship to my mind from a very, very young age. And so I think my curiosity, along with just a very kind of a, I don't know, my system was just built to be a mediator. These two things really just came together. And I think I knew pretty early on, about halfway through college, I knew exactly what I wanted to do for a career, which was, I feel really fortunate about that.
I have to note that my own passion currently is figure skating, and
Oh, wow.
so I resonate with the science and the art and the discipline. It's full, it truly is a full mind body of incredible sport,
Mhm,
and that you spent 10 years in that competitive way. That you, if we could draw the metaphor of edges and
mhm, mhm.
how you use deepening edges to bring to the therapeutic moment, and yet are able to lift, that you understand the core metaphorically for therapy as well as from your athletics,
Mhm.
and then the grace and beauty and balance that you must have owned, that you must have embraced, and um, just brought yourself fully immersed in it, how that translates to you as a therapist today, as a supervisor. Yeah,
Totally. It's a
yeah.
huge theme. It's my life theme actually. It's like um my relationship with skating was riddled with fear and anxiety and pressure.
Hmm.
And it was almost like a 10-year out of body experience for me. And so um learning learning from that has been about recognizing that even if there are so many things on the outside putting pressure, that this is always my challenge, my journey, my decision. But the hard part is tuning everything out for myself and remembering that. And that has kind of continued into adulthood for me. It's an ongoing theme.
Hmm. And but also this ties us back to your use of the word consciousness, and that the sensitivity that you've mentioned, that heightened sensitivity that you came into the world with, and that um, finding ways to protect from that which is outside, and then your clear understanding of states of consciousness, that
Mhm.
you have grounded yourself for decades in states of consciousness,
Yeah.
and how immediately that brings it right into a session. This is a beautiful, I feel a beautiful tapestry here of who you are and who you were, and and what nourished you, what lifted you, and what challenged you, and how you even bring that. I feel if I were to come to you for supervision or therapy, that you would bring this um the complexity and the simplicity, the
Mm.
beauty, as well as the precision in what
Wow,
you do.
I think that's a really accurate description of what I do. And it's missing one very important thing, which
Mm,
is the warmth and compassion that I've always struggled to find for myself. I
mhm.
don't think, I mean, I think people would describe me as like friendly and warm, but as a clinician and as a supervisor goes, I don't think I lead with
Right.
empathy and compassion. And that's partially because I struggle with that myself.
Yes. And it makes perfect sense when you're on a path from 4 years old, if not sooner, to be attentive to others, then that basket for self-care is less weighty. And then the discipline of being an athlete is that rigor and that challenge and that focus is not about the self-warmth, compassion, and all that. It's trained in the opposite direction, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but here you bring and integrate all of these in your own heightened level of consciousness, competency, immediate creativity, your intuitive sensibilities. Beautiful, beautiful. Um, there, there are a couple of more paths that I would like to get to. I definitely would like us to work with your two symbols. Before we go there, there's a couple of wisdom pieces that I ask therapists to share. What have you learned from clients? Is there an example from any time in your career where you could give us an example of the lesson for you?
I can speak generally. I have to think about a specific example of something I learned from a client. But what I have come to see is that there's this really powerful reciprocal relationship between understanding myself and understanding my clients. And it's not so much in that the more I understand myself, the more I understand them. It also works the other way around. And it's not because of the similarities that we share, it's because of both the similarities and differences. And there's this kind of crazy thing that happens when we relate interpsychically and interpersonally that
Hmm.
helps us kind of locate ourselves. And so I guess in a broad way, I think there have been significant moments along the way where I was like, I've watched my clients set boundaries that I wouldn't be able to set, or I've watched them change, and it just healed my own fears and worries about whether we can change as people and these sorts of things along the way. So in that sense, they've really affected me.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and interestingly, I feel like I've learned about feminism through some of the women that I've worked with. Like it's healed my own relationships. It's just, yeah,
Wonderful.
I don't, yeah, go ahead.
You know, that right there, that series that you've described leads us right into often therapists will share that the therapist, whoever they're working with, that there are occasions when the very problem that the therapist is trying to work on themselves comes walking in the form of a client or supervisee.
You
Has
can't
that
make it
been
up.
true for you? Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
for sure. I can't, probably more times than I can count.
Yeah. But it's common thread in the mental health field, no matter from psychiatry, social work, counseling, marriage and family, and psychology, of course. So if you had a wisdom that you wanted to share that you feel is important for therapists, something from your heart that maybe feels like reaching out to the network of the helpers. What wisdom, what is it that you would want to share?
I think two big things. On a practical level, picking a specialization is doing a service to yourself that you won't really be able to reap the benefits of until you have the specialization. And that comes from having become good enough at doing a lot of different things, but really wanting to kind of declare, I am an expert in Y or X, right?
Mhm.
And feeling like I want to do that at this point in my career where, I'm, 10, 15 years in. So that's kind of on a practical level, but on a different level, I think this was actually one of the other questions that you sent ahead of time to reflect on, but we have this perception of, or I guess the layman has a perception of the therapist being sort of this person who has it all together,
Yeah.
or,
Mhm. The
some kind of wisdom,
stereotype. Yeah.
right? And that's both true and not true at the same time. Like we do need to have, our what together
Yes.
to
Yes.
a certain degree, right? And that's not
Absolutely.
just to like function to not be dysregulated in session with the client, but it's also we are givers of wisdom in a sense. And so we do have to do work in that way as well. But on the other side of it, like we are allowed to be messy and we are messy and no one's perfect. And there's no
Mhm.
right way to do therapy. It's just what
Right.
happens in the
Right.
room. The being good at therapy is about being able to see what's happening with a capital S in a way that you couldn't otherwise.
Yes. Yes. I would so want to highlight that in yellow and underscore it. That again goes right back to your presence and to the immediacy, but the attunement of that seeing,
Mhm.
and listening and hearing from the intuitive heart. that you have. What do you wish you had been told or taught early on that you feel you missed out on?
I mean, this goes back to like way early, but I wish I had learned how to self-soothe.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Ah,
So simple,
beautiful.
right?
Yes, but also it really goes to that self-care and the connected piece that we are all works in progress.
Mhm.
We all make mistakes that we wish we hadn't or wish we'd found an alternative. And so it's that self-forgiveness and self-care and self-love that's not arrogant at all.
Right.
There's no room for arrogance or um, some egocentric
Mhm.
piece, not a competitive piece, but rather, and not a self-beating up. Blech. It's that holding the dignity of woundedness,
Mhm.
which then gives permission to clients to hold and to witness without shame and without judgment. And there's the power, I think, with that, your presence and the compassion and great empathy that you carry, that you hold, that you witness. All of these pieces that then bring a wholeness to who you are, Mina.
Yeah, that's well said. I like the idea of the dignity of woundedness. It's a nice way to think about it.
Yeah. I ask everyone to bring two symbols that they can um, present to us right up to the camera, and then describe the two. Now, the descriptions might be your perception of wounding and healing in this moment. It's just yesterday and tomorrow would be different, but it also can represent the qualities that you have of as a therapist and the qualities that you work toward, that you yearn to have. What did you bring today? And then we'll all be just really present to your description, and then I will amplify. I will work with you to, as you say, to bring out the narrative and to pulsate it a little bit, to give it some life. So, who did you bring?
I sort of cheated at the last minute. I added a third symbol, so I don't know what you want
Great.
to do with that, but
I love it. I love
I'll
it.
follow directions to begin with. The first is, sorry, I can't see myself. Is it centered?
There we go. Notes 2024, 2025. Supervision is crossed out. It's your
Yes.
supervision book.
It used to be my supervision book, with all my notes from my own supervision, and now it's just my notebook.
Oh.
I've had this exact same type of notebook with me since I started at GW. So I
Mhm.
have probably like 10 or 15 of these just full of notes of clients. And there's something really important about these
Mm.
books holding so much information in them. Um, but the other piece that really resonated for me and the reason why I picked it is because writing these types of notes, not necessarily journaling, but writing notes down has been a very important way of being with myself that I have a really hard time doing most of the time in my
Mhm.
daily life.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I have a really bad memory. And so it's almost like I turn to these books to collect pieces of myself.
Oh, oh, very
And so
beautiful.
I kind of cling to them a little bit. And it's not
Mhm.
the same when it's, on a computer, but I've been forced to switch to using online notebooks. But anyway, I still have
Mhm.
my paper notebooks because I'm attached to them.
Let's hold that and hold it up a little bit and tell us about the texture, what your senses pick up. What is there here that's really coming to mind for you and physically?
The size of it, I think, is notable. It's kind of petite and small and light, and kind of slight in its own way. Like it's sort
Mhm.
of unassuming. It's
Mhm.
a little
Mhm.
tiny notebook with kind of a
Mhm.
plain cover on it. And sort of it's got that sort of papery sound to it when I hold it. And
Mhm.
I think it just feels very stable and
Mhm.
um, uh, like antique or ancient. Like it's got a time
Mhm.
quality attached to it of some kind.
Mhm. It is tactile, and you are able to open it and close it. You actually can function by writing and drawing. And the power of words, the power of story, narrative, all tucked away in there, your narrative and your perception of experience tucked away in there. And probably opening to any page might be not only applicable then, but decade before, and then
Yeah.
now and
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Yeah. Totally.
This seems to match your leaning into narrative. You're embracing the idea of that we are lived story.
Totally. Yeah, it gave me goosebumps even to think about like coming back to the same piece of information 10 years apart, four different times, because your relationship to that
Yeah.
same thing just changes in a weird way.
Yes, yes. And that you can journal by adapting and changing the story and adding perspective by returning to early journals that have that you could add drawing, or that you could split the timeline and suddenly come down the weave of a different way of you being with people, a
Mhm.
different way of you responding to experience, and a different perception of who you are. And yet here you are able to hold this symbol from way over here in Maryland feels it feels very intimate. And look how you're holding this and embracing it. It's a sacred, uh, the intimacy of words and metaphor, of the holding, the holder. Now, if you were to ask silently this notebook what it would like you to really know, what it might need from you or want from you, if it has a question for you. So this is where we just take some time in silence while you move into that state of consciousness and bring alive the notebook that holds your words. So we're going to take a few moments,
Okay.
and I'll talk to everyone else out here while Mina is being silent and having a relationship with the very words the poetics of existence that are in her book. And those of you who are watching, you can do this. I invite you to do this with your own notebooks, or to take a piece of paper and write a few lines, even if it was what you had for lunch, or a memory of an experience, or a question about existence, about meaning, about purpose, about relationships. Writing that in and then folding your booklet over, creating a booklet, and then allowing just a meditative, quiet time when you can build a relationship between your words, your drawing, even dates and numbers, and see what would happen if you enfolded those and transferred them back to how that would have been for you as a teenager, and how this might be for you in your 50s, 70s, 80s. So, Mina, how was this experience, without describing the intimacy of that I thou relationship right there? What happened for you in seeking that relationship in silence, even though unfortunately it wasn't a lot of silence because I was talking?
Yeah. Um, I think the book felt like it became sort of a different facet of me asking myself a question, maybe like a wiser self asking or searching for a question to ask myself.
Beautiful, beautiful. And that's exactly the activity we can bring when we might ask clients to go home after a session and write a letter to themselves about their experience or write a letter to their inner child about their experience of an event or about therapy, and then to bring it back in, and then to fold it and unfold it. And how does it unfold if your 4-year-old self were to read that to mom and dad in that living room area, guess wherever you were, 4-year-olds, and or bring it forward in time. Let's go right to your next symbol.
Okay. Again, I can't see myself, so you'll have to give me some direction. Is that the
Okay, it's
focus?
perfectly, yeah. It says district Sangya, Sangya,
Yeah.
September 24th, 2004. Okay, so this is symbolic for you. It is a lived experience of time and a place where time and place come together with experience. What does
Mhm.
this mean for you?
Okay. Can I give you a little bit of background on?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so District Sangha was a 4-year group process that I led at my practice. And this was sort of the termination
Ah,
artifact that we wrote each other cards essentially. So this is the one that came to me. The reason why it's significant is because I created the group out of a sense of wanting to put people who were working on developing a new relationship with themselves and with life all in the same room. Sometimes when I work with my clients, I feel like, we all have these asymmetries in our development. You put 100 people in the room and we're all at different levels of development. And when you're working on yourself in therapy, your development changes or you're maybe on a different path than everyone else in your world. And maybe you're discovering about
mhm.
things about yourself. And so I wanted to put everybody in the same room to talk about what that was like, but also to use that group as sort of a petri dish in the way that we always use process groups to elevate, our ability to relate to other humans. And I also, and this is really the significant part, I wanted to experiment with what it would be like to take down some of these walls that we have around confidentiality. Obviously, not compromising or,
Right.
but, like what would it be like to put 4 of my individual clients or 6 at one point in the same room with each other? And how could we
Mhm,
manage all that complexity? And
mhm.
I honestly was so blown away by what happened in this group that it is probably one of the most significant things I did have done in my career
Oh,
is, is to do this. And so that's why it was very like, I don't know if this is going to work. I have this feeling that it's going to be good. I don't really, I'm going to work on making sure like all the protections are in place around managing the power shift and the dynamics and confidentiality and all this sort of thing. But other than that, like, I'm just going to see what happens.
how inventive and in the moment, and trusting yourself. And of course, you're warming my heart as having taught group therapy, group psychotherapy for so many decades that it is the spontaneity. It is your innovation. It is your awareness that you brought with, I'm going to make this safe, but it's not going to be so constrained. What would happen if it is about exploration and your readiness for that? And of course, it's invitational. So the client's readiness for that, and what incredible power and innovation. Um, that's a beautiful example
Yeah.
of the
Thank you.
of advanced psychotherapy, and really, and that is also a narrative from White and Epstein and the Dulwich Center in Australia and New Zealand to bring in multiple witnesses and to have group and for it to be much more overlapping, to lift up and honor the truth of the stories that are being shared with such respect. I just really want to applaud that moment that you created that, and the reward that you and they pulled from that. So, from my personal opinion, so much more powerful than individual therapy can possibly be.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's part of the reason why I picked this was because you taught my group class at
No,
GW
it's
and
10 years or 12 years
10
or
years,
whatever.
10 years ago, probably
10
more,
years
honestly.
ago. Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Uh,
What was the
yeah.
third element that you chose to bring in? Symbol three.
It's my mother's ring. I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, yes. Turn it. There you go. Yes. Yes.
It's an
Okay.
antique ring.
Mhm.
The reason why I picked this was because I always had a very complicated relationship with my mom. She was a skating mom, if kind of like a dance mom, but a skating mom. Um, and since she passed away 10 years ago, and since she's been gone, I've discovered that my relationship with her continues to evolve even in her absence. Our
Mhm.
relationship is never better than it's been now.
Wow. Wow.
I mean, they take the good with the bad with them,
Yeah.
but I'm just finding like I'm clinging to parts of her. And this ring is something that I wear when I want to feel close to her.
Mm.
But it's also funny because my family has a jewelry store. It's a family owned and operated store, and I'm the only one who doesn't work there. And so it's just significant that I've kind of branched off of the whole family, but ended up opening up my own business completely unaware of what I was doing. Someone called me an entrepreneur and I was shocked. So yeah, it was kind of it's significant in multiple ways there with
Mhm.
my family history.
The circle, the ring is the circle that brings us full circle. And you began with that holding the book like a treasure of words with meaning, reflecting who you are, and that ability to be open and closed. And so we bring the ring, then you also mentioned earlier an artery and how wearing the ring is connecting to the arteries, to the heart, which again brings us to the way that you honor and bring heart and honesty and integrity is so important, that deep empathy, um, and the courage that it takes uh, to be the figure skater alone on the ice and all the risks that that take, that your mother was holding some space that allowed you to be, and that was a rigorous experience relationship. So all of this with group as a circle, group as a circle,
Mhm.
the the stories that you write and that you hold in your notes from way back when to going onward, how your mother is a memory of who she was, and then she is a memory of who she's evolved within your heart, just as your practice in who you are, not what you do, but in who you are as a therapist. And then how these all come together, this the power of the symbolic, of the metaphor, of these are very grounded, um, meaningful, rich, multi-layered, but
Mhm.
very intimate aspects of the self that then you can continue to journal and imagine your mom then as she might be looking over your shoulder or sitting next to you as you open up the notebook and write to her, or be the scribe and let her write some words to you that
Mhm.
you imagine she would like to say. And
Mhm.
then so it becomes part of the book. And then you might even imagine this feminine and feminist perspective from the women's group with your mother and with grandmothers or aunts or sisters or daughters or whoever, friends, that you would bring together in your imagination, and listen to their wisdoms, the cultivation of who you are as you carry the heritage, the very genes and the very determination. Uh, the entrepreneur is a great success because you had incredible grounding and
Mhm.
foundation with determination.
Yeah. And here's an interesting synchronicity to tie in everything you're saying. I have plans to open up a new clinic here in Salt Lake that just focuses on familial female relationships. So mothers and daughters and sisters and aunts. So that's a new edge for me.
That is brilliant and beautiful and powerful. I'm I just want to applaud that you're doing this. It's so needed. Compassion and depth and connection and truth being witnessed and supported, and different truths being brought together under your safe guidance, and your humility, that you reflect the strength, the balance between strength and humility, of safety and experimentation, of the witness, as well as you immerse in engagement. And all of these factors are very advanced, um, high level skills that we want our beginning therapists to strive toward, not to assume knowing. That becoming a therapist takes years. We step into the position of being in the immediacy, like you said, of who you are, and then grow that. We can't pull 10, 25 years down. We want to, but in any event, if you could change anything about the profession, what would you like to see changed?
Okay, I'm cheating again because I have two things. I think first and foremost, on a practical level, I really would love counselors and counselor educators to be compensated fairly for how intense and complex and difficult this work is to do, and even more to do well. It's a travesty that we're compromised. I mean, it's a fact of life, but I would love to see change happen. Like if, insurance companies could treat us like MDs, because
Exactly,
some of
or
us have as much training.
well, and more so. And if we look at other disciplines, whether that be in computer science or any of the other sciences, or even any of the other disciplines, the the physical beingness that it takes
Yeah.
to do good therapy is absolutely unknown. It just isn't part of the stereotype.
Yeah.
Certainly, there will be coaches and life coaches and therapists who sit back in that more receded, objective, and maybe advice giving. But for the most part, the heavy lifting of grief and trauma is, and all the losses and all the angers and fear. Those are carried. The therapist's body and consciousness
Yeah,
must be
absolutely.
there.
For sure. So I think, feeling compensated makes that work feel different.
Mhm.
Especially counselor educators, because as one myself, I can't tell you how many students I encounter that wish they had had better training and better
Yeah.
education in their grad programs, but that's a different.
That's another branch that I would want to see changes, and I imagine that you resonate with that. Um, was there anything that you had wanted to bring up in our conversation that you felt is important? Either maybe something now you're reflecting on something we've covered, or something we haven't touched on that you want to include now?
I think just the last thought around a message to people considering going into therapy or considering or going into whatever people at the beginning of their career. I can't tell you how important a protective factor it has been for me to not just give myself space be to make mistakes and not do things right, but to see it as a strength. And
Yes.
because that has allowed me to recognize that there's nothing bad that ever happens. It's can you read? Like again with a capital R, can you read what's going on? It's just we're all just people in the world bumping into each other, trying to figure out what's going on. And therapy is a very kind of concentrated dose of that. And if you don't
Yes.
give yourself the space to do things wrong, you're never going to actually learn how to do therapy well.
I wouldn't want to end our session on anything else except what you just said, because really that really grounds the existence of being competent and compassionate in our field. It's a very big truth about who the person is.
Yeah.
And that is in a safe room, bumping into life,
Yeah.
bumping into the other. And as you said, with a big S for see and a big R for read, and really being so attuned and present. Mina, it's a pleasure
Likewise. Thank you.
exploring all these ideas, and any one of the things that we talked about could be another thread.
Yeah.
I hope that we will have another opportunity, maybe do a case consultation as a part of a
Love that.
different series. Um, thank you so much. Now,
Thank you.
would you like to say goodbye to our group?
And thank you for giving me a platform to share my ideas. It's an honor and a privilege, and it's humbling. So thank you, and hopefully see you out there.
And thank you for being a part of this exploration of the person of the therapist. If you have a recommendation or you know a therapist that you would like to see interviewed, um, go onto my website, sandtherapytraining.com, and send me an email. In the meantime, life is precious and a challenge, and it's meaningful, and it's us that creates the meaning. So take very good care.